Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. Talking about fire today, but we're mainly talking about flooding. There's a flood watch for Chico and for all the communities that are below the park fire. Kind of a rare storm that's hitting us here. And so, but this is something we need to get used to because forecasters, they look at the precip map, kind of their precip forecast, and then they look at a fire history layer and they generally call out flood hazard anywhere there's going to be heavy precip on a recent burn. So all this winter, every time there's a big storm that's forecast, we're going to see a flash flood warning for Chico and for Los Molinos and Vina and anything near a creek that flows out of the park fire. So putting this video out just so people kind of understand the specific hazards of where they live. I feel like, we can't all live in a perpetual state of arousal and fear. So, getting to know your flood hazard is similar to getting to know your fire hazard. Right? That's it's hard to live in a place and stay sane if you're worried about burning all the time, and if you're worried about getting flooded out every time there's a warning. So just like fire, flooding's got a real kind of physicality about it, right? There's floodplain, and there's houses that are in low spots that are vulnerable, and there's houses that aren't vulnerable. Just like fire, there's fire hazard is really based on physical science, and so there's a lot we know about it. So there's a kind of an amazing amount of infrastructure in California around moving water around, and my career, most of you know me as the fire guy, but my career has really been based around mapping, and mapping kind of happens where the money is. So in California, in the last, during my career, the money's been in water and in fire, and it hasn't been in things like, say, mushroom cultivation, or pick a topic that is interesting to someone, but probably not like getting big like federal funding. So that's a lot of mapping energy's gone into water and fire. So I got some stuff to share from both, obviously. We did a video 2 years ago that was about the Sacramento River flood control system. And that was when there were some flood watches January before last. And I highly recommend you check that out. I might play a little bit of it today. But if you go to our YouTube channel and search for flood control, I think it's one of the more important videos we've made since we've been doing this stuff, just for helping people understand really the big picture. And just like with fire, there's kind of this need for people to be kind of geographically literate for us to make good decisions, as a culture about how we manage water, how we manage fire, and sometimes the two of them come together. So I want to play a little bit of video. I've been running around the last couple of days collecting footage, and here's some footage from above Upper Park. This is kind of the south end of the Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve. So if we look back down here, Chico's right down at the, whoa, I'm sorry. I'll get my magic mouse up here again. This is kind of where B Trail drops down. So up by Brown's Hole. Let me find my other video here real quick. Yeah, so Chico's down here. This is what people call Sentinel Rock. Here's like the Frisbee Golf Course. And the B Trail, or the 10 Mile House Green Gate Trail, comes down to the creek around here, and then above that is the Ecological Reserve. And so this is kind of an example of some real high severity burning. The fire. So we're going to talk about kind of the fire severity. We've talked about it already, about how the fire severity affects flood hazard. But this is just to give an idea of why runoff's a problem. Is where the fire was lower severity, there's still a lot of trees and brush, and all that stuff kind of catches raindrops. So when rain falls in the forest, most of the rain doesn't get it to the floor of the forest. It hits the trees and it runs down the trees and gets into the ground. But out here where it burned really hot, there's nothing to slow the rain down. So a lot of Big Chico Creek Canyon above 10 Mile House Road looks like this. This is actually the old Humboldt Road. It's a good spot. It's just above Altatina. If you ever want a good view, it's a good spot to stop. So this is some of the context of why we're worried about rapid runoff. You've got bare rock. You've got soil with no organic material left on it in a lot of places, and steep slopes that lead right to the creek. So the problem with all this stuff is hydrographers, which are like geographers but for water, they like to talk about the curve, the runoff curve. And so if we look at CDEC, let's see, CDEC, water. There's this great site called CDEC, and if you're going to geek out on water in California, there's a ton of gauges, and let's just look at something if we can see, like the storm of 97, Butte Creek near Chico, hourly, and let's just see if we can go back to like 1997. January 1st. And let's say 97, 01, 04. See if that comes up. That was kind of the biggest storm on record in my lifetime. Butte Creek was 97. But if we look at stream gauges while that loads up, oh, sorry, not going to give it to us. This requires more prep than I can give it right now. We'll talk more about CDEC, but basically what it does is you can look at a gauge here, and I just want to talk about how you kind of read a stream gauge. You guys have probably seen stream gauges before. I'm just going to step out of that for a minute. Might be easier just to draw you a picture. Okay, sorry for the sidetrack. Just a little more footage of this is B Trail, looking across. Here's where B Trail drops into Chico Creek Canyon, so above kind of Browns Hole, Upper Park. And the deal with stream gauges is they show you kind of a graph over time of the flow in a river. And the problem with the conditions we have right now is that usually a storm starts and the curve is kind of slow as the runoff starts to happen because it takes a long time for all that flow to saturate the ground. And in the meantime, it doesn't really come running off. So the problem right now is that because there's no cover up here on these slopes, all the rain that falls and hits this bare dirt is just going to want to go down and quickly into these channels. And as we get farther up, a lot of these channels got completely roasted, and they're full of ash and little bits of burnt sticks and stuff. And so a lot of the debris that's going to come down isn't necessarily like landslides. It's just this big kind of wad of ash and charcoal and other like moon dust that's basically choking the bottoms of every little small creek right now. So that's the worry, is get a bunch of rain in a hurry, there's nothing to absorb it, and it comes pouring down the canyon. So what we're going to talk about mainly is what happens when that stuff comes down the canyon. We've got a kind of severity map here of the fire within Chico Creek Watershed. And here's 5 Mile and Upper Bidwell Park and the ecological reserve. And what we were just looking at on that kind of panorama is this kind of burn slope in here. But as you can see, that kind of bright red is where we've got the conditions like I showed you in the video, where it's just all black. As we get farther up, there's some green forest in areas that survived better. But a large portion of the burn in Chico Creek Watershed, the area that drains to Chico, is hot like this. And then when you get to Highway 32, that's where they stop the fire. So we've got, let's just do kind of a quick measurement here. All right, so we've got like 35,000 acres above us, right? That burned. And we could say, 80% of that is hot. So we got, 24,000 acres. So the way that kind of water people think is in acre feet, right? So if we got, say crazy scenario, we got, 6 inches of rain across that 35,000 acres. That would be 17,000 acre feet, 17,500 acre feet of water and a lot of that would absorb, but so hydrologists figure out how much that's going to absorb, how quick does it come down, does all that water get to Chico within a day? So when you hear acre feet, that's just what it means. It means that would be a foot of water across 35,000 acres. Now, okay, another part of the picture here is just that we get a lot more precipitation as you get higher up the slope. So down in Chico, you might get, 15 to 20. I said this the other day and someone said, my rain gauge says it's different. But we don't get a lot of rain down here, and we get, 4 times as much rain in, say, Butte Meadows as we do in Chico, just due to the way that the storms lift up over the mountains. So the heaviest rain we're going to get is likely not going to happen down in Chico. It's going to happen up here in the higher areas of the watershed. But what we want to talk about here is what happens when all that water does get to Chico, right? So it comes down the canyon here through Bidwell Park, and I got a couple pictures of what high flows in the park look like, and then it gets down here to 5 Mile. And, there's a golf course, and then here's 5 Mile right here. And so I'll turn off that blue line there. So here comes the creek, comes down to 5 Mile. You got the picnic area here, the picnic tables, and then you got this dam that you walk over. And let's just turn on some shade relief here. So here you can see kind of the levees, right? So Chico Creek comes down, here's a dam at 5 Mile, and then it splits, and you got Chico Creek, that goes through the park. You've got Lindo Channel over here where there's another dam that's got a bunch of graffiti on it. And then you've got the dam here that people call the Giant's Graveyard, or the Graffiti Dam. And the way that is all set up to work is that when the creek comes down, only about 1,500 cubic feet per second can go through the dam at 5 Mile. So they kind of look at the capacity of within the park here, if that was kind of running as high as it could, that's say 1,500 cubic feet per second. And then Lindo Channel can carry about 6,000 cubic feet per second. And then Sycamore Diversion here carries 8,500. So altogether, you can send about 15,000 cubic feet per second down Lindo Channel and Sycamore Creek, and then another 1,500. So if you get more than 17,000 cubic feet per second, you start to have problems. So the problem that we're likely going to have if we have flooding issues is not that we're going to have this huge, crazy amount of flow. It's that we're going to have big amounts of debris, of logs and charcoal and ash and everything else that's going to cause problems here and plug up 5 Mile. But when you see this graffiti dam over here, basically what that is that is designed to stage up the water. So when the dam at 5 Mile can't let any more water through, 1500 CFS, all that water goes over here in the Lindo Channel, and then this dam is designed to stage that water up to the height that it needs to get to spill into Lindo Channel. So it's a way of making sure Lindo Channel fills up before Sycamore diversion comes into play. But once Sycamore diversion's in play, then all that water gets shunted around Chico. So if we zoom out here on the big picture, we've got Sycamore diversion goes all the way around town. It goes out past the homeless camp on Cohasset, and it goes out under 99, out by downrange shooting range. And then it goes out past kind of Highway 32, Meridian Road, and it goes down all the way out to West Sac Ave, and you cross it right before you get to Bidwell Landing State Park, if you're going out West Sac. This purple is areas that flooded in 1997. So it's not quite related to what we're talking about. These red lines are levees. So that's the plan for Chico. There's several purposes for the Sycamore Mud Creek diversion. And that's one is to deal with high flows in Chico Creek so they don't all go down through the park. And the other one is to intercept all these little foothill streams. Because before this was built, there's no control on these, and these could flood kind of the north parts of town. And also what you can see with this is that the Chico urban growth boundary is kind of that flood control system. Like they haven't, the county hasn't really developed a lot around the airport outside of the system because these areas are prone to flooding. So in recent years, this has all gotten built out. This kind of north area out of Kiefer and Hicks. If you go back, let's just look at like historical imagery. I don't know how far we can go back. Let's just go back to like 1985 and see if Google will load us up. Yeah, so you can't see very well, but like 1985, there wasn't really a whole lot of anything out here off of Hicks and Kiefer, right? So fast forward to now, we've got all kinds of neighborhoods out here in the county. So some of those are protected from like Mud Creek and Sycamore Creek by these canals. But the levees kind of end here, and so then Rock Creek coming down out of Cohasset kind of could cause problems out here off of Kiefer. Most of the problems we have out here is like heavy rains that like, these aren't, well, I'm not sure what to say about that. But just that if we look at kind of the watershed above here, above Kiefer, we see that all this stuff burned hot, right? Like pretty much almost the entire watershed of like Rock Creek that dumps all down into here is fried. And so if we have heavy rains this winter, we're going to have problems out here, Kiefer and Hicks, right? So kind of one of the main purposes of this talk is just to look at like within the city of Chico where the relative problems are. And so FEMA's got flood mapping for these areas, and it's a little janky here for it to load. Let's see what it does. Come on, people. Yay. All right, so I got another picture of that. So for Chico proper, this area here, this is Highway 99, and here's Bidwell Park, and here's the levees, and all the way out to like downrange. Everything on the uphill side of Highway 99, north of Chico Creek, is considered a moderate flood risk. And that's because these levees that protect, like here's 5 Mile, and then the levee shunts the water out around Hancock Park and everything else. And these levees haven't necessarily been maintained to the kind of standard that people, the best standard, you'd say. So when we get big flows, it's not untypical for us at 5 Mile here to flood 5 Mile kind of picnic area, right? And this is the dam at 5 Mile that controls how much water comes down Chico Creek. So you can see that like there's all this debris here up against this dam. That happens usually when we have big floods or just big flows on Chico Creek. So likely we get big storms this summer. It's going to plug up. Here they come out with backhoes and they clean the stuff up. But when things are wild and woolly, if this gets plugged up, it means that a lot of water can't go down Chico Creek. This is big water at Bear Hole, right? And this wasn't huge water. This was like, I've got it written down somewhere. It's impressive, but it's like it wasn't like pushing the design capacity of what's happening at 5 Mile. And this is kind of cross sections that the FEMA's done along this diversion channel. And the diversion channel, once you get out past kind of Hancock Park, there's no levees or anything. It's just it's kind of this open channel. And the problem is that in dumping tons of water into here, using it as a flood control channel instead of a natural channel, it's kind of created this crazy erosion. I talked to a soil scientist, and he said that he thought that this channel, that the engineers, when they built this channel, they kind of underestimated just how erodible the surface was. So it's not it's downcut enough that Hancock Park kind of sits above it, and it's not really super flood prone. But when we get out here farther around Kiefer, that's where we're going to have some, like we said, there's no levees out here of any kind of substance, and it's sketchy. A lot of the development that's occurred has been kind of haphazard, right? And like, so when you look at kind of the historic meanders of this channel, it's really well kind of spelled out here in the topography, right? You've got like these kind of terraces here that are like more resistant, kind of like mud flow or consolidated gravels. And over time, the creek has kind of wandered and it's been cutting its way through this stuff. But in the past, it's kind of gone wherever it wanted. And if you look at now where there's structures out there, there's a lot of structures here in this floodplain, right? And extremely vulnerable to the creek coming back for what is its rightful meander zone, right? So relative kind of hazard across the whole landscape of Chico. This area, high hazard. This area here on the north side of 99, east side of 99, where I happen to live. Not the biggest hazard we've got here is if the levee fails at 5 Mile. Like if the levee fails at 5 Mile, and it had some major erosion issues in a big storm about in the last 10 years, right here at the turn by the bridge. So if this levee here fails, kind of between here and here, this neighborhood here between the Park and Lindo Channel could flood. That's just FEMA spells that out. That's why we're in this moderate flood hazard. Out here, like Hancock Park, etc., it's a little bit, like we talked about, it's a little bit higher compared to where the channel is, and not the highest risk. If you live on the kind of west side of 99, FEMA doesn't think that you've got a problem. FEMA doesn't call this stuff a flood zone at all. I don't know what they think, if like they think that the freeway is gonna save these neighborhoods or what, but the big idea with Lindo Channel is that if this levee doesn't fail up here, the gap here in the levee that lets water into Lindo Channel is only big enough to let enough water out through Lindo Channel as to not flood Chico downstream off of Lindo Channel. So as far as vulnerabilities, 5 mile. If 5 mile plugs up and the levee fails here, we're in trouble. If debris plugs this whole area up, and it's less likely that the levee itself would fail than that this whole area would kind of fill up with sediment, and the whole level of the stream would come up, and the levee would no longer be that high above this whole basin. So kind of in this kind of convoluted story about flood control, there's people that know a lot more about the stuff than I do, but there's just kind of been this back and forth between like the county and the city about, if you look at the kind of the original design for 5 mile and the Lindo Channel area, this is all kind of filled in with this nice little kind of riparian forest, and like, kids go to nature camp here, and it's this cool little wildland area. But for this to really function as a flood control linchpin that it is, like, this should all be bulldozed. Like all these trees and all this nice kind of nature and this beaver pond over here and everything else. Like, this is a flood control channel. This is not nature, right? And so obviously a lot of people love 5 mile, don't want this whole riparian area to get bulldozed. But that would be the kind of following the design standard that this was engineered with. It's like there's a huge amount of sediment and wood and everything else in here that isn't really what the engineers intended when they designed this whole project. So when you see these numbers that say like, hey, this thing can pass 15,000 CFS, it's like, well, it might not be able to if you got these big gravel bars out here full of vegetation that's going to like catch log jams. So we could probably get a guest on to talk about that particular issue, because people have been talking about this for, ever since the flood control project was built in the 50s or 60s about, hey, we need to come in here and like keep this maintained. So that's going to be one of the interesting spots to watch, is just what's going to happen if we do have big storms and we have debris. Someone mentioned debris flows and kind of landslides and stuff like that. We've talked a bit about the geology of Bidwell Park and everything else, and there's other places in the state that have much higher kind of landslide hazard. One of the things about like Bidwell Park is, as we've talked about, and if you look at this video, is that we've got this kind of layer cake of lava flows and not a lot of soil. And so the landscape is kind of like held in place by all this bedrock, all this kind of mud flow and lava flow. And then you've got dirt, that's kind of stuff that's fallen off the lava flow and stacked up. But it's not like you've got these big, unstable, deeply weathered hillsides like you'd have over in the Coast Range or in like Humboldt County, or these places that we think of having kind of landslides. So there are places in this landscape that have deeper soil and et cetera, but like there's not a lot of places on this landscape that are like super high risk for massive landslides. So obviously erosion's kind of a part of the story of this landscape. That's what created these incredibly deeply dissected canyons, was erosion, and often probably erosion happened after a big fire. So that basically wraps up talking about Chico. I thought we could look at a couple other parts of town while we have our flood layers up here. If you live south of Highway 32, you really have not that many issues with potential flooding. You can see kind of, this is the watershed boundary of Chico Creek. And then like when you get over on the other side of Highway 32 coming through Chico, this is all area that gets drainage from Little Chico Creek. So you've got Chico Creek here, and then Little Chico Creek comes down between Highway 32 and Butte Creek Canyon Rim. And that all comes down to Stilson Canyon. And then down towards the bottom of Stilson Canyon, there's a dam similar to 5 Mile Dam, and there's a diversion there. And so it's out kind of by the end of Piccoline. And the main flow of the creek goes down towards Marsh High School, Marsh Junior High. And then this diversion canal is the same as 5 Mile basically, in that it only lets a certain amount of water down Little Chico Creek, and the rest gets shunted out through this Barone Park and out to Skyway, and that's where you cross the little wetland on Skyway. And that flows out through the tree farm into Butte Creek. So that basically protects all of South Chico from big flows, and Little Chico Creek didn't get any fire in it when we look at where the burn happened. So just back to like flood hazards in Chico, it's pretty much like from Bidwell Park, like 8th Street, over to the whole east side of town is places that FEMA says have a floodplain risk and that are exposed to this fire. If you live on this side of 32 or on the other side of the freeway, your hazard is lower. So just leaving our kind of levee layer on, we're just going to kind of cruise up the edge of the fire and take a look at, as we go north, what other kind of issues might pop up. Basically, these red lines are levees that are part of active flood control, and there's no levees really between like Vina and Chico, and there's also very scattered dwellings out there. So, like I said, we've got the kind of Kiefer, Mud Creek, Hicks Lane issues, and then very few people living out. There's people off of Meridian, but the watersheds out here that kind of flow out through Meridian they're not huge, and they don't go that far into the burn. And people out here off of Meridian are kind of used to dealing with kind of rapid runoff and flooding issues anyway, because they're living in the country on some really poorly drained soils. So flooding's kind of a fact of life out there. So as we move north, out here, Deer Creek above Vina. Deer Creek's got a few levees. Deer Creek is really kind of braided once it hits the valley. Not a lot of people out here to get flooded out, but no protection really, infrastructure-wise, from kind of the full flow of Deer Creek. It's not like Chico where there's a diversion and the kind of strategy. There's like miscellaneous levees out here that were like mainly to protect farmland, but not like part of a big coordinated flood control effort. Now, these lower watersheds here that we're talking about, they've always been kind of flashy. They're flashier right now because they all got burned. As soon as this greens up, so even by like the middle of winter, that grass that's growing will kind of start to reduce the speed of runoff compared to just bare dirt. As we go farther north, we get up to Mill Creek, and Mill Creek, I'm going to show a video real quick. I was up in Mill Creek day before yesterday. We've got some cool stuff on our website. That's it's called Gigapans, which is basically just a real high resolution panorama. So I went out and I shot last couple days. I shot a couple thousand actually images of the burn, and you can kind of explore them on this viewer here on our website. But the best thing to do is to click on the link and open them outside of our website, because the viewer that's on the Gigapan website, you can come over here and you can click this full screen thing. And so this is Mill Creek, up kind of between Mill Creek, like 10 miles downstream of Mill Creek Resort. And as you can see, like this upper watershed of Mill Creek, like there's thousands of acres that look like this, that just burned extremely hot, killed every tree. There's still some green trees down in the bottom here, but very few. As you get farther up, we saw a few more green trees. But so when we're talking about kind of the problems that we're looking at in Mill Creek, we looked at some other imagery here that this is kind of in the middle of the fire's big run. But like when we look at kind of the whole fire, we've got this finger that goes up Mill Creek and like this huge area. I mean, it's not huge as far as like tens of thousands of acres, but a big area of Upper Mill Creek got really cooked. So one thing interesting about Mill Creek is that it's really narrow watershed. But we got like 7,000 acres, and that kept going. So we got like about 10,000 acres of hot burn within this watershed. So that all pours down here and comes into Los Molinos. And just like kind of Mud Creek and Rock Creek especially, and Kiefer Road, this landscape's an alluvial fan. So meaning that the creek has brought down all kinds of sediment over the last 100,000 years or less. And the creek naturally, during events like this, it jumps its channel and it goes wherever it wants. And so people have kind of gotten used to the channel being where it is and expecting that would stay the same. But that's not how things work at this landscape scale, right? Like, so kind of anywhere out here in Los Molinos, given if we had a really big storm and a lot of runoff and debris and everything, like anywhere out here on this alluvial fan is kind of at risk. Kind of like the creek can kind of, like if you look at the former channel, the creek can kind of go anywhere it wants in there. So it's a little sketchy. But what you gonna do? I mean, I think we've talked about on here, like, if you live in the foothills, you're going to get burnt out. If you live in the valley, you're going to get flooded. Like maybe a volcano too, like there's no easy answer. There's no like 100% safe place to live. I didn't want to live in the foothills because I'm a fire guy, but I live in the valley, and some hydrologist would say like, oh, you'd be safer in the foothills. So there's just not a lot of places on the landscape that don't have some sort of hazard. But as far as high-risk areas in the kind of near term, because of the park fire, Los Molinos is kind of one of the places that, one of the problems I think is that people don't perceive of the threat when they live in a place like this that hasn't had a big flood, it hasn't had a big kind of sediment event, whatever. You just living at your place. You don't picture it that like, oh, I'm in this kind of bowling alley of an alluvial fan where the creek has done what it wanted in the past. All right, so as we go a little farther up, let me turn this off just so we can see like what streets we're talking about here. So that area that I drew is kind of everything from like 7th Avenue back down to the Tehama Vina Road. This kind of downtown old Los Molinos is kind of out of the way of that that alluvial fan that we talked about. So it kind of goes from what's that? Fast Track Gas and Food. From there out to about 7th Avenue is kind of in this this zone of stream action. Okay, so as we go farther north, smaller creeks, you know, we've got Dye Creek. It's a little more scattered as far as like areas where there's like a whole bunch of people sitting in a bad spot. Antelope Creek, good thing that's going on in Antelope Creek for it is just that most of the timberland in the upper watershed of Antelope Creek had a less severe burn. And so you don't have like tens and tens of thousands of acres of hot burn. The forest is in pretty good shape, and even these areas that burned up here, a lot of them still have a really intact canopy. And what we've seen out in the field is that those places where there's a lot of leaves still on the trees, a lot of the leaves are already falling and they're carpeting the bare soil, and that slows down the runoff. Paynes Creek, it's not a huge watershed above Paynes Creek. There is some hot burn up in here, and it's people should be conscious of that. But it's not kind of like Los Molinos or Kiefer Road where you've got hundreds and hundreds of homes out there. Kind of similar in this meadow that like the creek in the past had jumped and gone where it wanted. That's how these meadows get flat, right? Is the creek kind of if this creek comes down and plugs up a bunch of sediment here and it raises the whole level of this meadow, then the low spot is where the creek wants to go, and it just goes to the low spot and it fills that in, and the creek just goes back and forth finding the low spot for thousands of years, and that's how a valley gets flat. These folks here decided that they didn't want that to happen to them. Build levee. Anyway, there's some sort of gravel mine there. So looking at where structures are, this is pretty well bulldozed out and channelized, and probably not gonna, unless there's a big old, a lot of the area, this isn't the first time that this area's had a fire above it. So if you look at like the Lane fire and other stuff, like a lot of these places have been through fires, post-fire storms before. Like this fire, it's unprecedented in size, but it's like a lot of areas above it have had fire in the past. Los Molinos in the past had big fires that burned the front country here, and it didn't like wash the town away. So you got to kind of, like if we look at our fire history map, let's just look at 1990s. So like this whole area here burned in the Campbell fire in 1990, and Los Molinos didn't like wash away. And same out here. I mean, the difference in this area out here is maybe there are less people living out here when it's all burned in 90. But just to say that like there's been big fires in the past that burned a lot of Mill Creek, and it didn't wipe out Los Molinos. The difference with this one is that in these higher precipitation areas, farther up, higher elevation, that's where we had this fire was significant. All right. Gully washer, someone says. Mark Sorensen says he lives downstream from Caldor, and that as the dead roots decay, we're going to see a lot of slides. Do I think that's true? Landslide hazard is kind of based on geology as much as anything. So, like I said before, a lot of this geology out here, it's just not very well suited to like big landslides because there's just not a lot of soil. There's a lot of bedrock. And so what you're talking about is in kind of heavy timber with deep soils. And yeah, so the tree roots kind of, even when trees are dead, initially the tree roots kind of hold everything together. And over time, as the tree roots rot, it creates opportunity for water to pipe through the soil. So like the water can get down into those tree root cavities where there used to be tree roots and kind of like loosen everything up and kind of saturate it. All right, so I've got a video that I encourage you to watch. And if you're interested in kind of the flood water and everything else, I've got a video that's just all about that, and I'm not going to cover it all right now. I thought I'd just I'll do a little teaser for it. I'll turn off some of these. Let's see. As you move down the Sac River, there's like a lot of levees and what are called floodways and bypasses and big kind of flood control canals and stuff, and all kind of intended to like keep water from flooding Sacramento, because Sacramento is like elevation 19 feet, right? And the delta's, elevation 5 feet, right? So Sacramento's dang low. And so check out the video. Like I said, I'm proud of it. Yep, I have to watch ads too. This video here, we talk all about the size of the watershed, and does anyone else have like ads up here for like trying to sell them like mail order brides and stuff? It's pretty weird, man. Okay. All right, I want to thank our sponsor, QTAC. They make nice stuff. They're supporting us through this month, and we appreciate it. Don't want to forget about them. I also want to tell you about this site called, there's a Sacramento forecast discussion, which is a little more technical than just your kind of Weather Underground or weather.com or whatever. But it's kind of the notes from the forecasters, and it's usually a good explanation. So let's just see what they had to say. They update it a few times a day. For the most part, models have been consistent with this, but latest ensemble data suggesting a slightly further south location in far northern California. A very organized wave will rotate around the upper low tonight across NorCal. So bring rain showers to the area, convective, allowing models, the short-range ensemble still showing the possibility of some locally heavier rain, especially across Shasta County. Some of the higher percentiles have been forecasting around an inch and hard to ignore given the intensity of the storm. That being said, this heavier rain should come with limited impacts unless it comes into the Park Fire burn scar, but it seems that it will remain north, but we'll have to keep an eye on the trends. Flash flood thresholds on Park Fire burn are very low, so this time we aren't seeing enough to pull an early trigger on a warning, but if the pre-mentioned convection in Shasta County does go further south, we'll need to upgrade the watch to a warning tonight. So they say that tomorrow by noon it'll be kind of mellowing out. And then we've got our, you can kind of see this low here swirling off the coast of Oregon, and kind of the storm kind of pulling in on us. So yeah, the wild card is how far out it stays, how far south it comes. I don't know why we got to be way off in the corner here, but Paul says, how's the debris flow risk in Big Chico Creek compared to the aftermath of the campfire? I think the difference is that the campfire, it didn't burn in the Chico Creek watershed after, so we didn't have any threat of landslides in Chico Creek. We didn't see landslides in Butte Creek, which was burned by the campfire and has super similar geology. So like I said, I'm not worried about landslides as much as just like lots of crap coming down and piling up at 5 miles. So it'll be interesting to see. There's just when you go up in the burn, let's see if we can. Let's see if I can queue up something from being out in Beeser. This is Big Chico Creek up by Forest Ranch, and it's just kind of moon dust, and then all the little gullies are kind of full of ash like this. So that's a lot of what's going to mobilize is just this really fine ash and kind of burnt litter. I was more focused on talking to people here. I'm going to play this real quick if you haven't seen it. This is Mary Maeda talking about how you can kind of understand whether or not your oak trees are going to die. Not sure if we can get audio. It's conspiring against me, the audio. All right. Well, this is on our YouTube site, so check out. I was hoping in the background you can kind of see what's happening with the forest out here. What she's saying is that a lot of these oak trees are going to live. And then we see a lot of the like burnt needles are falling down. This is kind of crazy. Just you can see all the bay leaves here. They're all frozen, pointing up canyon. It just tells you like the wind was blowing. You can see like this is called like needle freeze, and the leaves are pointing like the direction that the wind was blowing when the fire just like flashed through there so fast it just like froze everything. So I did a kind of a Twitter thread on the Chico Creek Canyon stuff, and if you follow me on Twitter, you can check out. I retweeted that, and saying that's about it for now, folks. I'm working on some stuff from my trip out with Cal Fire out to the Mill Creek, and I showed some of that stuff the other night, but I've got some good videos shot, some panoramas we shot way up in the top of the watershed, and it's interesting out there.
On the other side of the road from what you're seeing right now. Malcolm North and others had a paper about stand density index talking about roughly 20 to 30% of stocking level is what used to be out in these areas for a combination of factors: drought resistance, resistance to insect and pathogen outbreaks, fire resiliency, etc. And that's really what we're seeing in these SPI fuel breaks, you can see just how well they survived. And not just the conifers, there's a beautiful California black oak right there as well.
So the narrator here is Jonathan Pangburn. He's a forester and a fire behavior analyst with CAL FIRE. He's talking about how the low density of trees in this shaded fuel break that Sierra Pacific Industries put in here, how it allowed all the big trees to survive here, and also how it gave them an anchor point for their firefighting. They put dozer line in, and this is so a lot of what we saw in Mill Creek that were the areas that weren't completely cooked were places where the fire had kind of skunked around and where they'd been able to put it out.
This allowed not only the fire to go through and not take out the overstory trees, but you can see how easy it was for firefighters to come in here and clear some line and make sure that the fire didn't spread past this area. This is the very reason why this standard exists.
So what are the economics? Like, what's preventing us from doing this over a larger proportion of the landscape? Like, what does it cost them?
Well, what it costs them is that into the future, these areas are going to be producing a lot less timber for them. Mm-hmm. And as a business, you know, they have to be concerned with their bottom line. They need to be able to create a product. And at the same time, one of the main reasons this worked was that they were able to have a substantial fuel break on multiple sides of the road, both sides of the road. They were able to create a different set of conditions out here because the land is all basically theirs, as opposed to where they butt up against neighboring property owners, and whether that's other private owners or the Forest Service, they have no control over what the neighbors do.
Right.
And really, we need to be focused on the landscape as a whole. Dropping all of the forest down to 20 to 30% stocking level there's a good chance that would be economically unsustainable.
I'm curious though, as SPI takes more and more losses in their even age stands, yes, this is producing a lot less wood, but the stands that were 20 years old that got nuked are producing no wood. And at what point will their losses in their clear cuts may teach them that their economic models of what their profits should be are just not reasonable in our kind of current climate era?
Well, I think we have to understand that fire will go through stands at some point, and whether that's an even age or an uneven age stand. An uneven age stand is kind of what you're seeing out your window right now, where there's still pretty heavy mortality, because if you have too many ladder fuels, you're going to lose a lot of not just the lower levels, the lower canopy. So this was kind of cool, just seeing like how many of the big trees survived in here. And that when you think about like the entire burn, and we talk about 450,000 acres or something, it's easy to picture it all being cooked, but that you've got a lot of variety out in there. And like if we look at our severity mapping of where that was, a lot of that was out in this country, and you can see their fuel breaks. And so, some of what we were looking at was out in here. And the blue places are where there's still healthy trees. So, there was a decent chunk of all of that landscape that burned out in here, this footprint. That, hang on a second. That red is kind of the final fire perimeter. And you can see that a lot of there's, here Jasper's coming in. A lot of that stuff that we're seeing, the mixed severity, there's, it's not a trivial portion of the burned area. It's still got kind of green forest on it.
Anyway, like I was saying, I got like a gazillion pieces of video right now, and I got to kind of take some time to make some sense of it and put it into a good narrative for you guys. That's one of the things we got going on. And we got a little more of just kind of the straight up roasted forest. Where the fire came up out of Mill Creek. It just moonscaped a lot of this landscape. So, when we talk about being worried about runoff in the hot burn parts of Mill Creek, it's because there's just like moon dust. These are kind of hot burn plantations that are kind of right on the rim coming out of Mill Creek. Sorry for the jerkiness. This is looking down into Mill Creek in where the area where the fire really blew up out of there. And like I've said before, I'm kind of curious if this will be replanted. When you look at where this is on the landscape, over here, you've got these kind of clear cuts that were replanted, but then you've got this totally inaccessible, fire-prone landscape down slope of it, and so yeah, it's like, well, and they've tried, major measures in previous burn scars, like these fuel breaks, and spent a lot of money on mastication, thinning the plantations, and they've taken these huge losses. And so I am curious, when we just look at the overall kind of management landscape, all this land is owned by one company. And when we start looking at this kind of 20th century fire history of the Ishii front country, everything between Cohasset and Red Bluff, basically, all that puts these kind of timberlands on the margins of the Ishii Wilderness at this like perpetual risk of incineration. And so, yeah, I'm curious what the decision makers there at Sierra Pacific Industries are thinking about as far as like where they are going to decide to replant or not replant. There's places that, like Concow, where they've bailed out just because it wasn't worth it. Like they realized that they'd never get trees to a rotation. So one thing I've talked about a lot in this kind of, a lot of what we talk about in here is kind of idealistic or kind of pie in the sky, being that the biggest obstacle to letting fires burn in the Ishii Wilderness, well, we know that fires are natural out in this country and that they oftentimes threaten few resources or few communities. But the Forest Service is never going to be able to let fire just burn out here freely because it threatens Cohasset and it threatens all of this SPI timberland. However, if SPI decided that they wanted to bail out of someone was able to get that land who was interested in burning and managing this for something other than commercial timber, 50 years from now, 30 years from now, this could be a place in California where you could let fires burn. And when we look at, that we've spent over probably $200 million putting this fire out, the cost of buying 10,000 acres of land or something like that is kind of trivial compared to what California taxpayers currently pay to protect this investment here of this private company and to protect the watershed values and the wildlife and everything else. But the irony is that the more we protect this landscape and try to keep fire out of it, what putting out every fire we can in the Ishii Wilderness bought us in the big picture was the total incineration of the old forests of Mill Creek Canyon, right? And so, how is that kind of in the public interest? I think our idea of what constitutes the public interest has been fairly narrowly defined by the timber barons and the folks that profit from keeping fire out of this ground. So, big picture, Lassen Foothills is a fire landscape. People who do business or along the margins of it are at great risk forever. And I think this tells the story. This is the place. You can't get in there. And there's a fire that burned over here in the last 15 years or so that was clear cut and replanted. And it's another one of those places where whoever replanted it is going to have to kind of evaluate their strategy before they dump thousands of dollars per acre or thousands of dollars in general into planting more trees out there. We got the private timberland kind of shows up here in yellow. I'm curious where we're seeing that stuff. I think we're seeing that. I think that's down in here. I think this is stuff that got logged after the mill fire. Mill fire burned in, when was that? Park? No, not Park. Mill fire burned in 2012. And so this got logged and replanted after that. And then it got cooked. All those little baby trees. Anyway, tough place to do business. But the success story is that these fuel breaks were effective in giving firefighters a place to engage. And a lot of this comes down to luck. It was the fire laying down and behaving itself was, what enabled them to go direct through all this incredibly difficult country. Having fuel breaks in the right places helped some places. They're able to kind of right here, not here, here, not here, here, like. So all the better to try to kind of expand the treatment, right? There's a lot of folks that are afraid that when they hear this research that we need stocking levels that are a lot more like this than this. A lot of people think that's just a timber grab. And you'd be cutting a lot of trees to make that happen. But these trees in these thinnings are some of the places that trees are surviving. So there's kind of got to be a give and take. We're not going to end out with a whole landscape that looks like this. But if you look at what it looked like, 150 years ago, it was pretty sparse, widely spaced trees. All right, people. Catch you all later. Thanks. On the way by.